Well, thank you for having me, and thank you to Sheriar for publishing this book along with the others that have preceded it. And thank you all for coming. This is informal, so you can, I'm just going to chat informally about this book, and you can chime in and bring up things as you like. But of course, the book is Creation and Its Causes, as I dare say you know, and it's the core of it. It's the core of it is a talks Baba gave in 1927-28 to the Meher Ashram boys. Not people will think Prem Ashram sometimes, but actually Prem Ashram didn't exist yet. But it was because of what happened quite literally while these talks were being given, that the Prem Ashram came into existence. In fact, it was coming into existence right while these talks went on. And so these were, you could put this in, you have a children's book section. See how that goes. That,
you never know.
Yeah.
Ward, it'll probably sell as well as all the other books.
Yeah.
But the amazing thing is that Baba did give it to adolescent boys. That was his audience.
Yeah.
And that is one of the astonishing things about this book. This is a book, it can be said really of any major book. This is a major book, without any doubt, that the historical background is always relevant and is always important. But in this case, it really, really is. These talks, I would really say, were like instruments in Baba's work. That's what they really were. They were talks, in a sense, secondarily, although they are really of major importance as such, too. But this was part of his work with this group of students. And I imagine most of you are broadly acquainted with the whole history, but the effect of them was to precipitate this love madness that happened among that whole community of kids. The stories where they, in fact, it was on January 1st, 1928, that the whole student body began to weep and wail uncontrollably for hours together. And now when we look back on it, we're acquainted with this having happened. Most people are who have read anything about this. And the great book on this is Ramju Abdullah's Sobs and Throbs. It's quite a masterpiece, actually. So now we're aware of it. But at the time, who would ever have heard of anything like this? Have you ever heard of anything in the history of the world quite like this? Where a bunch of kids, especially, I remember what I was like in those days. I was good at making my parents weep and wail. That I could do. But, that's the last thing on earth that you would expect. And the mandala, Chantri's diary, it's like they were noticing, look, what is going on with these boys? And it just, when it happened, like, what on earth do you do when you've got 120 kids weeping uncontrollably? And then when Baba made his appearance that night, at that time, he was in the crypt cabin. That's the name for what's now the Samadhi. It wasn't built of stone yet, but when the instant Baba appeared at the window, there was total silence. And Baba just went on with his series of talks without any interruption at all. And so there's this amazing response that was precipitated. I remember Sheriar Basali, he was one of the Prem Ashram boys, Meher Ashram at that time, so he was there. And he was describing times with Baba, and I don't know if it was this time, but I bet it was. But he would say that, like, before and after the sessions, it's like these boys, they would come up to embrace Baba before and after, and they would just grab him, and and all over the place, and just wouldn't let go. This was happening. In fact, in the middle of these talks, there was a new rule: half the boys can have an embrace before the talk and half after, because I think the scene was just such a wild one. This was, yeah.
Wasn't there some little story, I think it was in Salt and Throbs, about Ali chewing on Baba's sandal or something?
Yeah, he did. He tried to eat it. Yeah.
It was so,
Stuff like this going on. Eating, Baba's sandal, those heavy leather sandals they had.
he tried to eat it.
This kind of thing was happening. And, but then what's so striking is that the talks are on matters of high philosophy. The highest, or as this weird astronomy. There's a big section on astronomy of the sort that you never got taught in your 8th grade astronomy class, I can guarantee you. And the planes of consciousness and the asmans, and a whole another aspect of the spiritual path that has never been given out in God Speaks or Baba's other books. And I can imagine, I mean, when I was that age, I did get interested in things, very much so. But it would be sort of an absorbed, intellectual kind of concentrated thing. It wasn't weeping and wailing. It wasn't a love response. But that's actually what these talks did produce. So it sure looks like some kind of universal work was happening. I don't see any other way of understanding this that involved the head and the heart. And where both are 100% active. Because in terms of their content, these talks, any of you had read any of these yet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A couple people,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But most of it have not. Well, they're not a difficult read in the sense that, say, God Speaks is, or Infinite Intelligence is. I mean, like the sentences of those books, God Speaks, Infinite Intelligence, are very, very long, and it's a very long breath, so to speak. These chapters go on for a long time with heavy redundancy and often very difficult and deep ideas. But these talks are nothing like that at all in their style. The sentences are short. They move quickly from one thought to another. Also, the book is completely full of these illustrations, which I think are beautiful, beautiful illustrations that were almost certainly based on some kind of diagrams that Baba would have had made by the Mandali and available for display. We don't have an actual account of this in the diaries, but it must be so, because some of the talks will allude to, B in the diagram and C in the diagram. So they're very quick moving in that sense, and they're also very vivid and poetical. More than, I would say, God Speaks or Infinite Intelligence. Like there's the language of oceans and bubbles and waves and drops and light globes, and it's quite interesting and vivid that way. You could imagine it well. So in its style, it's quite unlike those other books, but the ideas are very, very deep. I mean, they're as deep as anything you'll find in God Speaks, actually. So it's kind of an amazing. Actually, I think many people have praised the cover, and I will also. It really is captured by the cover, because this shows, actually, this is from a talk where Baba was talking about the significance of the straight and the circular. It's quite astonishing. Actually, Nadia, who did the drawings, when she read this, it stunned her as someone working with, shapes and visual things. the significance of the straight and the circular. And so this abstraction, and these are light globes coming out of the own point. There's this highly esoteric, abstract side to it, and yet it was completely personal because it was all happening with Baba right there. And also, the theme of love does come up in these talks because at the end of most of them, Baba will say, okay, you can just forget about all these explanations, right? He had just been giving them. If you really wanted to forget about them, he could have not given them. But he said, forget about all these explanations and do just one thing. Create prem. You know, prem is it's possible that Hugh might know the meaning of the word prem.
Love.
Yeah, he's a Sanskrit scholar, so although that's not a Sanskrit word, is it? But create LOVE. So he comes to that at the end of all of the talks. So it is there that. But the rest of the talks were on these mind-blowing ideas. So it's a very remarkable combination of the head and the heart, like with nothing else I can think of in the Meher Baba literature. Also, I mean, this, if you can imagine the scene, Baba had been, this was the Meher Ashram now, and Baba founded it in May 1927, earlier that year. And they moved up the hill in June. You know, it's now Meher Retreat, that big tower up on the hill. You know, the ground floor is all that rock rooms. Well, that's all there was then. The upper floors hadn't been built yet. And those were water tanks, actually. They were built by the British. And so there were no doors going into them. So the Mandalay and Baba too, with picks, had to make doors going into them. And take a look next time you're there. It's like you have to go through that much stone to do it. It's quite a job.
Did you say Baba himself?
Yeah.
Wow.
I think I remember Eric saying, not the very first time he met Baba, but maybe not long after that, he saw Baba doing it, actually, working on that, making a door into it. And one of the rooms became a dormitory. You know the East Room? That's the one facing away from the Samadhi. Mera and the women lived there later, so it's remembered for that. But earlier, a whole bunch of the Meher Ashram boys had lived there. And the opposite room, the West Room, which is now the museum, you know where the museum is? That was kind of a classroom. So at first, the earlier talks Baba gave from that West tank room. And they would be at night. We're talking like 7:30 or so. So December, January, it's pitch black by then. And for those of us who live in India, it's exceedingly cold. It might get down to 60, 55. I grew up in Wisconsin, but that's another lifetime. 55 seems like water's going to start freezing at any moment here. So it would have seemed cold. And also, remember, no electricity. So Ahmednagar is 6 miles away. They probably could see a little bit of night glow of the city lights, I suppose. Erangown was like this small village. There might have been a few lanterns here and there. And Baba had been progressively creating this protective bubble around all the boys for several months in all sorts of ways. The first part of this book is a history, and you can read about how he was doing that, where he moved them up the hill, out of the ebb and flow of things. They were taking some of their classes at the Hazrat Babajan High School, which was down by the road, but Baba made a rule where they couldn't talk to the other kids at the school. And then the Mandalay couldn't talk to them either. Only the people who were their teachers in class. See, a lot of the Mandalay weren't doing that. But even the teachers couldn't talk to them outside of class. And nobody could touch them, physically touch them. And You might wonder why this was happening, but to me it seems obvious. Remember, in the days of Mara, men couldn't touch Mara, right? Well, I think he was creating a state where they could actually be receptive to the experience that he was going to give them. And I think any kind of, probably somebody touched them, it would shatter that.
Okay.
And meanwhile, Baba himself was fasting. And on December 20th, he went into, it was called the Crypt Cabin. It's now the Samadhi. And secluded himself there. And he fasted for 5.5 months until May. So again, we don't know how Baba's universal work works, but since I couldn't possibly know, why not talk about it anyway? It would seem that there is an interconnection, doesn't it? With Baba doing this to himself and these boys being created in this beautiful environment of total protection from the outside. Remember, they had quite a lively life going on among themselves. They had classes and all sorts of other sports every day, all, really, nice, tasty meals. And in the dormitory, Rao Saab wrote a book about this, and there was always somebody on watch when they were sleeping to make sure that snake didn't get in or that a blanket didn't fall off them and they catch cold. I mean, they were really in a protected sort of space. So they were being completely separated from all contact with the world. And Baba was doing that with himself also, with his own body, secluding himself in the Samadhi. And it sure looks to me like these would be avataric techniques in creating in them a state where this could happen. Yeah.
And, I was thinking about how those boys had busy days. They were very busy all day long,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Just, they had chores, they had to clean themselves, they had to take care of the room.
Classes.
Classes going on and then all this stuff. They were probably exhausted by the time these talks came around.
Mm,
And yet they seemed to have been totally enthralled.
yeah.
And they were probably like, in a special mental space.
It sure looks like it.
Yeah.
Baba created all these conditions where they could enter into, and Ramju describes it very well. There's a quotation right in the first paragraph of the introduction from him on this, where it looks like Baba brought them right to the verge of the point where the inner world was open to them. It sure seems like that. If you can imagine, so the first talks were in the West Tank Room, but then Baba went into seclusion in what's now the crypt, the Samadhi, the crypt cabin, and he would come to the window, and there's a very nice picture. Can I open a book, or will it destroy its value?
The words
You should sell it second.
Yeah.
Discount.
Get a discount now.
Now it's right.
I'll tip.
Sign it, it goes triple.
Shatters its seclusion.
That's,
Yeah, here's the photo. I don't know if you can see it.
oh,
Can you see it? So there's Baba. That's the crypt cabin. That's a window. So if you go to the Samadhi now and go in the door, it's the window on the right-hand side.
Right.
So Baba would appear there, and he would start dictating alphabet board. And we don't have a full description of this, but it must have happened this way, that someone, maybe Vishnu or one of his mandali, would interpret as he was dictating. And then there had to be translation. There were about 100, 120 boys outside on a platform that had been constructed. And there was a kind of a pandal overhead. So if you can imagine, it's dark night and, okay, they cooked the pandal, but the stars were overhead when you step out. And yeah, I think it was pure magic. And the kids were in this state. And then Baba would give these amazing, amazing lectures. And I think they were carried, and now, and here's another, question that I couldn't help but wondering about. So I'm talking about, my own ruminations over, this project started 25 years ago, rather embarrassing, it took so long. But it's given 25 years to think about it. And one question is, how would Baba communicate this kind of content to a bunch of boys between 10, 16, 17 years old? And beyond that, how would he do it with boys who didn't speak the same language? Because there were Marathi speakers, there were Gujarati speakers, there were some Persians, and probably some Urdu speakers. I'm not quite sure whether an Urdu translation happened or not. And so remember, then we've got Hindus, you've got Zoroastrians, Muslims, and one single Christian. So it wouldn't seem very promising, would it, for lectures at night to boys that age with such vast differences between them. And so in the process, there had to be a translation into, Marathi, Gujarati, Persian. So how would this ever have worked with content of this kind? But obviously did, to judge by the response. And I think it was like this, that Baba, how, the only one who could really imitate Baba at all was Mani, she would show his gestures, but how expressive he was with his hands and with his face and everything. So I think he would express these very subtle ideas in a way that was so vivid that they all got it. Like I always use I wish I could think of other examples. I don't know, a light glow. Maybe he could somehow show something or point to a lantern and you'd sort of get light glow. Or a bubble. Maybe he would show something popping, or else the idea of hollowness. It's a really major idea in this book. Very abstract idea, right? Hollowness. I don't know, would use a gesture. And I think they would see it. I think it was so vivid that for the moment that Baba was giving these lectures, all these kids, they got it. That's what I think. And I'm talking about things I couldn't possibly know about, so take it for what it's worth. But I think that what had to get accomplished in this universal work was to make this communication and this contact at that instant that he was with them, and where they understood it then. And I think they did.
And Ward.
Yeah.
But also, I think it's important to bring up that he had props. Like, I loved how he did the lantern and the mirrors to help, give them. I mean, that helped me to understand it. And then, like the rag doll that would be folded over to stone and then go through evolution. So I thought that was pretty amazing that he had those props.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, there was that. You're saying to illustrate evolution, to the human form is present throughout evolution, and only the human form, but it's unfolding. He had a little doll, and would move it, show it. And I don't know. You know how really gifted Baba was at manipulating things. So I think, like, to show like a veg, a tree turning into a worm. I think he would do it so that you would completely see it. Yeah.
It makes me think a little bit about some reports that people who met Baba who would say they weren't aware he wasn't talking,
Right.
Or they weren't aware that it was being translated. So he had some way of actively communicating.
Yeah. It's like that performance medium, you might say.
Yeah.
He was such a complete master of it.
Yeah.
And also in Durham, as Cassandra was just there at the event, Gil Alvarado, a lot of you would know him. He was with Baba's disciple Chuggan. Do you know Chuggan? He was one of the early Mandali. Who was there? He was the cook and also a teacher at the schools. And Chuggan was talking to Gil literally moments before he died. Right after talking about this, he had a heart attack and died. Yeah?
I just wanted to ask if any of the boys were on the plays at all.
Yeah.
I haven't read it yet. Just looking now.
Well, I would call them good students because within 10 days of Baba's describing the planes to them, a bunch of them were on the planes. I don't know if Myrtle Beach students are quite that good. I mean, it is kind of amazing, isn't it? So when he began it, it doesn't seem to have been so. But by the end of the talk, some of them were 6 planes. Get that? By the time January 11th, Abdullah Pakrawan, Chota Baba, he was called, had lost consciousness, and Baba said he was on the 6th plane. And by the end, the second half of January, a bunch of them were. Yeah, but I think that in the course of these talks being given, I think kind of they all, you might say, almost were. I mean, they're right at the brink where you could see these things. That's what Ramju says, to the very edge of direct experience. I think the talks were so vivid. And what Chuggan said to Gil was, when Baba was talking to these boys, it was not at all like when he was talking to adults. There was no mental interference, and it went directly into them. The conveyance of God went straight in. And, because, we've got all this mental stuff we've acquired from adulthood. So Baba has to work with that when he's talking with us. But it wasn't there with them. So I think this universal work that he was doing was completely successful. And I think it involved the head and the heart. It was all this amazing visionary information about all sorts of topics. I mean, if you do read it, when you do read it, you'll see what I mean. His movement from one thing to the next, and the beauty and the subtlety, the reach of what he's talking about is quite amazing. He covers so much ground over the course of these talks. But then the experience was part of the whole thing. I mean, they actually, I think, got it. So I think this was important. Now, another part of it, I think the real essential work was at the instant he was giving these talks to make his communication with this undoubtedly archetypal group of kids, And I think myself that when that happened, it was done. The main work was done. But there were further ramifications. One was these kids themselves. They've got to be great souls, a lot of them. They have to be. And Baba said at one point that the work he was doing with them would manifest in 1, 2, 3, or 4 lifetimes. So I think that a bunch of them, well, maybe there's another back, but at some point you'll have these people who will just catch on fire and become some of the great luminaries of the world, the St. Francis's and so forth. So I think that's another part of what he was doing. But a third thing is for us now. Now we have the content, and it's amazing. This really is a major book. I would say from this period, Infinite Intelligence gives a really huge part of the story, and I know it's a difficult book. There's no doubt about that, but it really is an important one. And I would say this is comparable in a very different way. It's not on the same subject matter at all. It's kind of the last major dispensation from Baba during the 1920s. But another thing that was going on while he was giving these talks to the boys involved disciples. There was something there called the Sadak Ashram. Sadak means a seeker. And they had built these little cells right now behind the Samadhi. If you're looking at Baba's tomb on the backside, it was, of course, the crypt cabin. So these little meditation cells were built, 6 of them. And one of them was left empty, and there were 5 young disciples who went into them, and they were to remain there, never step out. They were given just milk, and I think they had to keep silence the whole time. And this started actually on December 2nd, the Sadak Ashram seclusion of these young men, 20s, but most of us Mandali were that age then. But Baba had said of them that they're not circle members. And he also basically told these boys at one point, "You're not in my circle." So I think that this was work with non-circle people.
Do we know how the boys were chosen to be them?
Yeah.
Were they handpicked by Papa?
Yeah. In November of the year before, 1926, Baba closed down Mehrabad. And there had been what was called the Hazrat Babajan School. It was really a school for Erangel kids, a kind of a lower grades and what's the suitable word? Kind of a lot of remedial education. I mean, a lot of these kids were really from terrible backgrounds, totally poor. Not all of them, but many were. And Baba was really creating a good school for them. But he closed the whole thing down and left. And it looked like he was going to be gone for 6 months. But then he suddenly came back and wanted to start the Mir Ashram. And to do it, it's hard to convey, in this book, I just put a few sentences, but what is entailed when Baba's going to start up something. It's like holy hell for the Mandali. I mean, Baba would put up a plan and have a long discussion, and then the next day he would cancel it. And then the next day he would say, "I'm canceling because you're just not enthusiastic tonight." So then he would do something else, and he would put someone in charge, and then everybody would give that person hell, and he would put someone else. And by these kinds of methods, Baba would get them to the state of responsiveness and resiliency and immunity to criticism, where they could serve the roles that he wanted them for them to do. So he did all of that, and finally launched this thing. And they, in responding to your question, they put out advertisements to all the major newspapers in India, which means in those days Pakistan and Bangladesh also, and even in Persia and even in England. So there was a very extensive advertisement that went on. And maybe 20 major publications, something like that. And then it was, the ads are really inspiring. It was going to be a school that would give a full education, but with an emphasis on spiritual training or spiritual education, non-denominational, no recognition of caste or creed differences among them. Also, all costs are covered. The school, food, and even travel to and from. Everything was paid for. So from Persia, he paid their whole trips. So there were, he started getting responses, and everyone who came, the parents had to come with the kid, and they would really explain to them what the program was, and what the food was. You know, big thing is food, always is, you know, and the rules, and they had to sign a paper to leave their kid there for 2 years. So it was quite a formal procedure that happened there. Yeah, and when new ones would come, Baba had something which it was called the branch ashram. It was located down the hill, and newcomers would be there for a month to see if they were really fit for inclusion. So there was a lot of selectiveness that went on. Yeah. You know, even, you know, Ali, some of you may be acquainted with Ali. He's the main, the hero of Sadhs and Thrabs. When he came, actually at first Baba rejected him. Not because of him, but because of his dad. But I think there was some complaint about the food, so Baba said, all right, go home then. In fact, with that whole community, they're called Mughals. A lot of them are Persians living in Bombay area. And they started coming, and at first Baba said he didn't want them. And he said, these Mughals are promise breakers. They don't keep their word. But finally he was prevailed upon, but it turned out to be totally true, completely true. There was no end of trouble from the parents, not from the kids. So there was a lot of careful selection that went on. Here's the, I mean, I'm just sort of rambling on here, talking, so chime in as you're doing.
It's great.
But here's a neat thing. When the talks ended because some of the boys were in such a state that Baba really had to attend to them all the time. Like Abdullah, he was in such a state he could have died, actually. You know, and others were really out of control and just couldn't be separated from Baba for a moment. But here's a neat thing. Meanwhile, Baba had a meeting with the Mandali, and some of the boys were just love mad. But other boys weren't, but were acting as though they were. Because you could kind of get it, you know, you've got these people and they're getting all this attention. And you kind of want to be in on it too. It's not hypocrisy, it's something,
Yeah.
when you're that age,
Wanting to be loved.
yeah, you want to be loved too, and you want to kind of be in on the program and kind of be admired, and you sort of.
I mean, it's that age.
So look at how realistic Baba is. So he had a meeting with the Mandali, and he said he didn't want these who weren't actually having the experience to lose the benefit of the education they would be getting.
Yeah.
You see, he cared about that. He said they should go to class until they're so overpowered that they can't do it anymore. But if that's not really happening, this is of real value and they should get it. So, but at the same time, he didn't want to ruin the atmosphere by accusing people all the time. So he would very tactfully find a way so only the ones who were really love mad got into the Prim Ashram. Isn't Baba marvelous, you know, to be in the middle of this so realistic about what human nature is like. Yeah.
You know, I'm on this reading group with Asheville.
Yeah.
They're reading Creation as Causes, and we were reading it last night, or Tuesday night, I guess it was. And we were reading the notes that are in there, the replications of some of the applications and the questions that the boys were asked, which were, I couldn't have answered them the next day.
Right.
But also, there were notes about their health care. And there was a note in there from Padre that says something like, I examined this boy and he's fine.
Yeah.
You know, typical Padre language, right?
Right.
But we were reading through those, which are kind of small. You need a magnifying glass for those.
That's this, oh, I'm in the wrong book. But this section, there's 10 pages of documents from the period. Here we go.
Yeah.
Like that.
We were struggling.
And if you, get out your magnifying glass. You can.
Ah,
Oh, my goodness.
These are the forms that parents had to sign. By the way. This is signed by Shireen, Baba's mom, for her other son, Adi. Yeah,
And rules, and the
And
rules
rules.
are there for them to follow.
and the rules are very sensible, very practical, you know.
Very precise.
Yeah, about the sorts of things that really would matter for boys in that age. So, I mean, the fact that this love thing was happening shouldn't, I mean, we should remember that there was a lot of really basic work going on, and boy, you really had to do it properly. There was one episode where someone hadn't cooked, I think it was for the Hajar Babajan school, hadn't cooked the rice properly. And remember, a lot of these, it's sort of in our modern world, we're a bit out of touch with this, but it was really very much a caste society. So it's like these low caste kids, who cares about them? They're just dirty and they stink and all of that. That would be how people would feel. So if you're making rice, well, this is good enough for them. I mean, I don't think anybody would have said that, but that attitude might have kind of been there a little bit in your attentiveness. And the person who didn't cook the rice properly really got it. I think Baba might have hit the guy. So, you had to do everything really well. Chuggan was not allowed to come to the talks because he had to cook the food, things like that.
And
So-
wouldn't you say that that's always the way it was with Baba? You know, that was just ongoing.
Yeah.
That kind of precision and
Attentiveness to all the practical, ordinary things. You see, this wasn't for the Mandali. The experience these boys had wasn't for them. It was really for this select group of souls who I think are surely going to play a big role. So that's the thing, when you have the Sadhak ashram and these Mir ashram and then Prem ashram, which emerged right at this time. And then the striking thing is, when it was over, they left and they never came back. A tiny number did, like Asfendir Vasali. And meeting one gives us the impression we've met there are a couple others, but very, very few. So I think this was a particular phase of his work for a particular representative segment of humanity. And when it was done, it was done. And Baba left and never came back to that again. So, here we're so conscious of the, the Westerners like Elizabeth and Kitty and Margaret and Delia and those people, we've heard their stories. So Baba went to the West in 1931 and he was the beautiful Christ, all of that thing. But, they had no way of knowing, but they had no idea what had just gone on. This unbelievable scene with this bunch of boys. There was just, holy smokes.
Was there a Westerner among the boys? I'm trying to remember. No.
Baba tried to he sent Rustam, Adi's brother, to London in 1928 to try to get someone. But nobody, he was starting to have some success, actually, and then Baba called him back. So it didn't happen. Yeah.
You mentioned the 120 boys. Did that number change, vary?
It was between 100 and 150 over most of this period. Yeah.
So people would drop out and be replaced?
Some of the parents dragged their kids out. When this love craze thing started happening, then Gossa, you can actually understand why parents would wonder what was happening.
How did
So-
they know?
Huh?
How did they know? Did they go home to their homes or did they stay nearby?
Most of them were not living there. Like in one case, one of the boys left for some reason, and Baba warned about this boy, and he wound up spreading all these false stories among the people in Bombay.
Got
So there's, I mean, there's all kinds of
Right.
tall
Rich
tales and
travels.
lies being told about it.
And I think the villagers would have made things up, right? This was kind of a mysterious thing. They
Yeah,
didn't know much about it.
mm,
The
I'm
boys were
not,
kept isolated. They kinda
yeah,
talked together.
yeah. It's hard to know how much, I mean, nobody could actually get in there. Even Baba's followers, if they wanted to see Baba, you see, the top of the hill was all sealed off. And to get to see Baba, there were occasions of darshan, but you couldn't go through the Mayor Ashram. You had to go another way outside to get into the crypt cabin. But I always loved the little episode that when all this was happening, the out of control business with the boys happening, Baba's mother, Shri, came up and she was saying, Merog, get these boys to stop crying. She was not at all that type. So her brother-in-law, Masaji, one of the Mandali, was there. And so Baba sent her back down the hill with Masaji and Raseb. She wasn't allowed to come up again. She did not at all like this kind of excess sentimentality, things like that. So, but anyway, this is the whole scene that was happening around Baba. So the whole first part of the book is a history of what was happening then. And this is why you really have to get the significance of this, you have to have an idea of what was going on, being accomplished through all of this. But then the heart of this book is then these 34 talks, which are quite astonishing in what they convey. I mean, it's not, again, for adults, it's amazing stuff. There's stuff that we had no idea were part of Baba's account, part of his darshana. The whole role played by Prananakash, for example. I think that's come up a little bit. In fact, in previous talks here, I've mentioned it a little bit, but it's here that you really find out about it. And it has an enormous place in Baba's cosmological account. Pran is, of course, prana, energy or movement, and Akash is space. And these are the primordial constituents out of which the whole universe arises. You'd have no idea of that from God Speaks. It never gets mentioned. Things like that. So there's quite a lot here that's quite, it's actually amazing. He gives an account of the earth and the sun that is like nothing you've ever heard before. And so this book is actually the third and the last in a series of books. And again, my hat is off to Sheriar for having been willing to take on books like this. They're both, they're long and they're certainly Infinite Intelligence is a very difficult book, and all of them are. I don't know. Maybe you'd find Creation and Its Causes challenging. Also, it certainly is quite mystifying, a lot of it. But also, these have been published as what are called critical editions. We're going to have a whole session on that this coming Thursday for anyone interested. Next week.
A week from today.
A week from today, at the Circle of Friends, 3 to 5, on Baba's words and what we mean when we say Baba's words and what's involved in editing and presenting them to the public. And it's actually a topic that most Baba lovers are not textual editors. I'd say probably a minority of you are textual editors.
I learned a lot of new words reading. Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
I'm so
but
grateful
actually
I could
when the
just look it
topic,
up on my phone.
But when the topic comes up, actually, people have been very interested because even though Baba lovers don't do this themselves, it's a tiny, minority. Hugh would have dealt with people, with the critical editions. A lot of Baba lovers do care whether what is being presented to them as Baba's words really is that. Yeah.
Do you think these 34 talks were constituent of the book?
No, I don't think so.
So,
For one thing, the book was okay. It certainly wouldn't be creationist causes because the book was finished by then. But I myself don't think that infinite intelligence was either, although that view has been strongly.
What was the question?
Whether any of this material the book or presents
constitute.
constitutes. Well, let me say this. It certainly isn't the book or infinite intelligence would be the only one really relevant here. Infinite intelligence, in my opinion, certainly wasn't. That's my opinion. Whether the book has recapitulates content from this, I would have no way of knowing. When it was first presented to Merwan Jeswala by Erich, before any of us got to see this, Erich was saying, if you read through and see whether you think any of this is the book. And Erich Merwan gave what I thought is a demonstration of the kind of common sense that I wish we all had. He said, well, I really don't know if it's the book because I haven't read the book. And that's really what I would have to say too. I just don't know. But when we look at these three books, one reason why the book might be something completely different is these three books show us that Baba was quite capable of multitasking. These books are nothing like each other. From Infinite Intelligence, there is one Tiffin lecture that probably is a record of one of the dictations from Infinite Intelligence. So there's common content. Nothing else is there. What did we find in Infinite Intelligence is not to be found anywhere in Baba's other books or messages. Tiffin lectures, yeah, so here's what these three books seem to be. These are three together plus In God's Hand, which is a facsimile reproduction of something in Baba's handwriting, right? Which is highly philosophical, once again. But these three, Infinite Intelligence is again, this is just speculation, but I mean, I think there's very strong evidence for this, that a bunch of talks Baba gave in 1926 to the Mandalay. And they got recorded, and the notebook was buried for 100 years almost, until Erich released it and we started editing it. So this would have been just to the Mandalay. And it seems to me that this was something Baba intended for the future, because nobody ever talked about it, and its ideas never got brought up again by the Mandalay in any of their writings. So I really do think that was a time capsule piece that Baba gave. The Tiffin lectures is nothing like it. It's these are actual talks to the Mandalay, particularly 1926, but a couple in 1927. And this, I think, would be the spiritual training of the Mandalay in their Gyan aspect. Gyan is knowledge, a spiritual education, you say. I think that's exactly what it was. So if you want to know what education they got in the domain of understanding, well, this is it. This is probably the heart of it, I would say. And it was during this period, it seems between about 1922 and 1927, the training of the Mandalay was really at the center of Baba's focus. They were kind of at the center of his focus. But starting in August 1927, it shifted. and he was focused on these schools. And these schoolboys were really his focus. And I don't think the Mandali ever again came in. Of course, you know, to serve Baba, you got trained. It's not like that wasn't happening. But it was always to do the work he wanted them to do. Whereas before that, they were really his focus to a large extent. So this is during the period when they really were at the center of his focus. And Baba was giving talks to them in 1926 at a rate that he never did before and never did after. They're just every day he was giving, piling. There are actually more than are included here. Eventually, I suppose they could get edited and published too. But these are really select premier talks. And then this third one is from the next year. And between 1 year and the next at Mehrabad, a whole sea change would happen. It's hard to convey how different the whole mood and atmosphere would be. So the second half of 1927 was nothing like the first half of 1926. It was a different universe. And it was really in August of 1927, it was really obvious that the Mayor Ashram was what Baba was interested in. And right then, a whole bunch of the diary, the combined diary was ended, the Tiffin Lectures were ended, probably Infinite Intelligence got written up then, that's my guess. And Khorshid completed a complete manuscript of all of Baba's ghazals and poems, because I think the reason is they could see everything is changing, the old program is over, we've got to finish this and put it to bed. And then from September on, the Mayor Ashram was all that Baba seemed to care about. Some of you may have heard Mara talking about, and Khorshid and others, about this period. They were down in the post office, and when Baba was up in the hill, they never got to see him. They really missed it. So they would make these little things to sort of get Baba to remember them a little bit. And they would prepare a cup of coffee every day and send it up. And the boy who carried it to Baba drank half of it. So for 6 months he had half a cup of coffee. So even Mera and the others got completely neglected by Baba for a lot of this period, because he was totally focused. And you can see why. To precipitate something like this, you know, it was all his work going on. So this is something, the third piece, the third major book from this period. And with that, I think we have the major stuff, except for the book itself. Does anybody have it, by the way? Al, you got it.
What?
The book.
No, I don't have a book.
Oh, come on, we know you're going.
You're hiding it in your mustache.
We know.
Yeah. But it looks like we have the early Mehrabad avataric dispensation, so to speak. We've got a pretty complete picture now, I think.
Thank you.
When I first came to Baba, it was like, I had God Speaks and Discourses and the Everything and the Nothing and a few other things, and that seemed like it was it. But now the picture is really broad. So this early stuff gives a whole new window on reality from Baba.
You know the comment that Gandhi made about the book when he viewed it? He said that when Baba said something, he gave someone the power to do it.
Yeah.
Does anything like that appear in these 3 books?
I think they have a force like that. I couldn't say relative to the book itself. But I think these are authentic renderings of what Baba said. And I think they have a tremendous force.
No, I mean that when Baba said something, according to Gandhi, he said, I see now, when you tell someone to do something, you give them the power to do it. Was there any talk about that phenomenon?
No, I haven't heard any of that idea being talked about.
in all this.
But I mean, I do think these talks to the boys have that kind of force,
I do too.
you know, as evidenced by what in fact happened. So all of this, yeah.
Yeah, I've been to a whole bunch of these seminars. I've been following this guy around cross country. And I hear a lot of the comments from the people and see their reactions. Also, we did an online series early on where we read this, and I got a lot of emails from people. And I really believe that these talks have an interesting effect on people. They say they come away feeling kind of, well, the words I hear is like dazzled, kind of it's like stunning, and that their minds are somehow blown. I mean, these are the reports that I've heard in first person and from email. And you know, I've read Tiffin Lectures and I've studied Infinite Intelligence. This book has had the biggest effect on me, and I also feel that it's very special for this age. Something's happening right now. Don't you have that sense that something's trying to break through, that Baba's about to take us to the next level? Somehow I feel that this is a part of that. So anyway, that's how I take it after following her around for a while.
Yeah. Well, I do think that, I mean, a lot of the content is really kind of bizarre. I don't know what you'd say about it, but spectacular also, and astonishing. But I do think that at the present time, the world is capable of understanding this kind of thing, whereas in the past it would not have been.
No.
Not at all. Like at the very beginning, Baba's talking about, you know, counting the universes, right, with the fuzzy mirage. And there are actually other important things on that in the course of the book. Well, 60 years ago, the world would have said, this Mayor Baba's just a crackpot. But now, they wouldn't say that at all.
Got the Hubble telescope.
Yeah, all this stuff in the universe is nothing like what we thought it was. So I think that the world actually is at a point where it could begin to understand things from this that it never could have before. And it's really worth it. I mean, if you read things that are sort of weird, it's worth, you know, digging in. That there's a very coherent vision that is presented here. And there's a lot of it that's kind of, quote unquote, logical, actually. It's quite, he'll follow a series of almost like establish a premise and then build on that premise. And his section on astronomy very much does that. So it's really, if you're so inclined, it's really worth studying it, I would say. Did you want to say anything, Cheryl?
I haven't read the whole book yet, but you know, I've been at everything you've done with this book. And did Baba, and I haven't seen that Baba said anything to the boys when he disbanded the Mayor Ashram and the Prime Ashram. Did he, the only thing I know of is I heard it from Asfandiar himself talking, that Baba said, go home and I'll call you when I want you to come back. But anywhere did you, whether it's in this book or material you read, did you see anything about Baba saying anything, especially the Prime Ashram, when they to go and do something or whatever?
You know, I guess there could have been a lot that was said that, you know, never got recorded or that I haven't seen, but mostly not. I think he just sent them home. Now, the Prem Ashram is a little different because some of them stayed on actually, like Ali did, and Abdullah Pakran, and someone named Ali Akbar, and there were a few others. And Ali wound up actually traveling with Baba to the West. So he did have some further work to do with this select bunch. But it wasn't quite so much a school deal as he was working with these particular souls. But mostly what it looks like to me, in the main part with the Mayor Ashram, is when the work was done, he sent them out.
Yeah,
And that was kind of the nature. It doesn't look like they were meant to become his lovers in the sense of becoming part of the community of Baba lovers. I don't think that was their role. Okay, Esfandiar did. He sort of gave us one representative Premashram boy so that we could, sort of like Phyllis Frederick is like our token psychic and Muhammad was our token must. So we could be satisfied we've met one. We don't go chasing after them. But in the main part, he sent them out, and I think his work with them was done, or they were going to do it. I don't think they had the destiny to become. It's not that they didn't love him when I say they weren't his lovers. I mean, they weren't supposed to become like Baba lovers, part of a community of Baba lovers. I don't think that was what his work with them that was at all. Did you want to, Doug?
Yes, what do you make of Baba's exhortations to the boys to create love? What do you make of that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody?
I just have to say, to me, that's the big takeaway of the book. I thought the book was a really easy read in the sense, like compared to Infinite Intelligence,
Right.
which I couldn't get through. And I loved the history that you presented. It was just so entertaining and fascinating. There were a few concepts that I couldn't quite wrap my mind around that I tried and I just gave up. But my takeaway, and I hear an inner voice saying to me all the time, create Prem. And so for me, I'm more consciously trying to create love, no matter what I do. I mean, it's not that I haven't before, but those two words have become very significant for me.
Yeah.
Because we can do it like every minute of the day.
Yeah. It is kind of paradoxical because one could say, you can't create love, you have to receive it from God, like that. But that's not what he said to them. He kept saying, create love, create love.
Well,
Like they had to exercise themselves. But then he did say something else. It's on December 16th, there's a chronology in the middle of the history. And one of it, he says, your love should not be heavy. It should be light, spontaneous. And he gave an analogy. And I've never seen this before, but Baba said, when I was a boy, I had a little pet, a little doll that I would always carry around with me. And when I wasn't doing something else, I would just devote myself to this doll all the time. I don't know, I've never had a kid, but kids do that, right? At a certain age. But if I wasn't in school or I didn't have something else to occupy myself, I would just spend all my time with this doll and love the doll, play with it. And he was saying, your love should be like that. Otherwise, if you're not occupied with something else, but it's sort of like spontaneous and natural and light and not heavy. That's what he said, shouldn't be heavy.
Well, when you think of a child playing with a doll, they're in an imaginary relationship with a doll. And they're loving that doll, even though it's so in a sense, it's like evoking love, right? And what's the phrase he used there? Prem
Pahijay.
Which was translated in the book as I need love.
I need love,
Which is a little different than saying creating love.
Yeah,
It's like I need love. It's evoking, you know what I mean?
That Baba needs love?
No, that the spirit, whoever the person is with the doll, I need love. That's kind of the relationship you have with a doll or a stuffed animal or a teddy bear. You're pretending to have love.
Yeah. You know that famous quote that Baba describes how love travels from heart to heart. I cannot quote it. But I mean, if Baba first loved us, then we can love.
Right.
It's not that we're barren of love. And, what I noticed, like I said, my takeaway from that book is that I can be more conscious to create love just by making loving choices.
There was a consistent, again, the very last part of each talk, Baba would come to this love theme, and he would say, you know, you have the rare opportunity of having a Sadguru in your midst. He called himself Sadguru in those days. They're very hard to find, but you have it. So take this opportunity. Now is the moment. Don't waste it. And he would make it clear, love me. He wasn't hiding, being bashful about that. Great love for Baba. So that was a real consistent emphasis throughout all that. This mixed in with all this other high philosophy stuff he was giving them.
He wanted us to create love, and then also, he said also to receive love.
Yeah, he didn't describe it that way to them, but it was certainly obvious in the situation that they were receiving love from him.
Yeah.
But they were supposed to create love. They were supposed to be active in the process. They were supposed to try, something like that. But then Baba would do these things, like here is, there's an episode with Ali, because actually others had been precipitated into this inner experience of the plains before he did. Although he was all from the very beginning very sort of obsessive in his love for Baba, but Baba was would call him in to see him and then send him away. Call him in to see him and send away right away. And he was driving him because Ali just was mad, wanting to be with Baba all the time. And then Baba would sort of go to him saying, you know, Ali, he not really doesn't really love me very much. He just wants to, all he cares about is his schoolwork. Wouldn't you ordinarily think that was a good thing? But he's his schoolwork, and he just wants to be back with his dad. That's all that he wants. But that was not true at all. So Ali lost all control and just started running around Ahmedabad madly, and Rao Sahib had to catch him. And he just was, again, gasping and weeping so much that they thought he could actually have a heart attack and die. And finally, Baba took him, and Baba pressed his head against Ali's chest and was completely silent. After a few minutes, he lifted his head, and Ali was, they pried his eyes open, his eyes, just the white of his eyes were there. And he got precipitated into one of these experiences also. So Baba was doing all these different kinds of things with these boys. And then there was actually among the student body as a whole, after a couple days, things kind of normalized. Classes were as usual, but there was an elite group of them where that didn't happen, where they began to, some of them experienced the plains and some of them were just love mad. One of them just was weeping and wouldn't stop all the time. And Baba said, if this doesn't stop, he'll go mad, but it will become a love madness, like that. So these were the ones who just couldn't function. And then they got segregated off into the Prem Ashram. So the Prem Ashram was always, you could say, part of the Mayor Ashram, but it was its own, they had their own sleeping quarters. And then there was an episode where Ali, this is after these talks ended, these talks were right at the center of this educational period between January 1925 and 1929 when Baba closed the Mayor Ashram. So right at the dead center of that, all these talks happened. But then Ali got dragged home by his dad. I'm not telling this whole story. It's, you read Sobs and Throbs. It's quite a wonderful story. But he kept making these escapes and would jump on the train and steal some money from the cash box to pay for it and make his way back to Baba. So this kept happening with him. But the first time it happened, Baba said, if he doesn't return in 7 days, I'm closing the school and disbanding everything, and we'll all end. So it was quite all this drama. He sent 2 of his mandali, went to Bombay and tried to talk the father. But meanwhile, Ali made this daring escape and rejoined Baba on the 7th day. Well, when this was happening, Baba said, it's all going to have to be done over again, completely over again. And what Ramju thought was that was what happened in the Toka ashram period. So in May, Baba suddenly dissolved the whole Mehrabad ashram. I mean, can you imagine what is entailed in doing that? There are like, I think 500 people had to get moved. You had to tear down the buildings, and all the school got moved to Toka, about 70 miles to the northeast. And Baba started the whole thing up all over again. But this time, Ramju said, the difference was that it was a meditation focus instead. So a lot of the boys would wake up at 2 in the morning and start meditating after having slept only an hour or so. And the doctors there were worried that it'd shatter their health. Kids need more than an hour's sleep, but they were fine actually. So it was kind of a meditation obsession that happened at Toka. But in other respects, a lot of the things repeated. Baba once again began fasting for about 2 months. He created this building in Toka just for the Premashram boys. And Baba basically secluded himself for about 6 weeks with the Premashram boys there. And hardly anybody else ever saw him. And it was, again, a big meditation thing. So it occurs to my mind, maybe this is, again, in the future, meditation will come into the foreground. Don Stevens had said that Baba told him that time would come, or meditation would come the premier of the paths for people. So maybe this was for that. So I've just been rambling on.
Good.
Any other things?
It's been an hour and 15 minutes. You can go on longer if you want.
Sure.
That's a good
Not if you
idea.
want. It's all up to you.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or from any of you or anything? Yeah.
I remember reading St. Francis de Sales. One of his disciples asked him, well, how do you love God more? And St. Francis says, well, how does a runner become a good runner? He has to practice running. How does a cook become a good cook? You have to practice it. So it's a question of practice it. And as you're saying, or as Baba said, create love. I mean, I guess the first thing would be to have the intention to create love. And he already tells us that to love God in the most practical way is to love our fellow human beings. And then we've had that message over the years, create acts of random kindness. So just to be kind with that intention, I think, to create love.
It's interesting in one of the talks, this is before the big love eruption had happened. It's the talk of December 14th, if you have the book, right at the end. Baba said, I can see clearly those of you who are starting to have the love experience, your eyes are all red with love. And he said a master can see just from a glance at somebody the depth of their love and the depth of their search for God. And I can see this with a lot of you. He told them that right then.
One of the descriptions that he was saying to them, how to have unbounded love for him.
He did, there was a, just December 29th and January 1st was really the day, as I said, where the dam broke. And this love, complete tsunami overwhelmed Maribad. But 2 or 3 days before that, there's a very interesting moment where Baba said, okay, he'd finished his main talk, said, I have something important to tell you. And he basically told them that he was the avatar. And now, Baba wasn't characterizing himself as that. And of course, avatar in India, has all these different meanings. But he really made it pretty clear that he was the avatar. And that's, I can't think of an earlier time where Baba had really said that, actually. There would be this talk about him being the avatar, and Pasni Maharaj had said it. And somebody had had a dream where I think Sai Baba or someone told the dreamer that Baba was the avatar. So it's like that idea was out there and the word was used sometimes. But it was really to these boys that he told them that he really was the avatar. And he said to them, the avatar does what Sadhguru doesn't do. He can bring down he can bring down people who aren't circle members back to creation, after God realization, back to creation consciousness for the purposes of his work. And I'm thinking of doing that with a bunch of you.
Yeah, are you speaking to us or?
To you!
That's why he's come.
And so he was saying, let's see who gets the apple. Isn't that funny? Yeah. And he did say things about, like Abdullah Pakrawan, that he would have a big role to play in the Arab world. So that was kind of an amazing moment there too. So these must have been special kids. They really must have been.
Speaking of that issue about creating love or receiving love that was brought up earlier, Baba, I read recently where Baba explains that it's like God is the ultimate object, the most beautiful and irresistible, magnificent object, and the lover, who would be kind of equivalent to his disciples, is the one who is the savior, because once the lover really loves that beautiful God object, union occurs.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Baba seems like he was just irresistible to these boys at that time. And he was so beautiful and so attractive that they just couldn't, they would actually just grab him and try to tear bits of his clothing and things like that. There's always this funny story that in the Toka ashram, the boys were just following Baba when he would go over to the women's side, and they would just follow in there. And the women were complaining because they felt that it's like, Baba's spending all his time with these boys. We want a little bit of time with them too. So Baba said, okay, let's resolve the matter by a tug of war. So the women took one arm and
Oh, no.
so they had to tug of war, and the women won. So the boys had to stop it when they got into the women's side. Isn't that just like Baba to resolve things in a manner like that?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Why boys and not girls?
Yeah, I guess I don't know.
They
I
needed the
mean,
most work.
Baba really, throughout the entire term of his work, he really did separate the men and the women. I mean, even at Marazad, right, there were some crossovers by the very end, but he had a men's side and a women's side. he really didn't mingle them very much.
But he didn't have a girls' school.
Well, the Hazrat Babajan,
Yes.
let me get, this will be a good point in history. When you read the history, this will be clarified, but what the institutions were. There were actually 4 institutions here, and I've noticed in the Baba world there's almost universal confusion about this. But the first is the Hazrat Babajan School, and that was the school he created in Erangel right in 1925 that was kind of basic education. And then there was the Hazrat Babajan High School. That was completely different than the Hazrat Babajan School. And it had much higher standards and, grades. Standards means grades. Went extended much further and had, more advanced classes and a much more advanced curriculum. And they kind of got the equivalent of accreditation from Bombay University. So
Boys
that
and
actually,
Boys and girls for these 2 schools, or just boys?
I think the Hazrat Babajan High School was just for boys,
Okay.
but the Hazrat Babajan School did have girls.
And part of that school was also teaching them hygiene, which I thought was really interesting. They didn't know basic rules of hygiene.
Yeah, the Hazrat Babajan School.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it was things like that. In fact, I'll come back to that in a minute. But then the Meher Ashram was created about the same time as the Hazrat Babajan High School. So the Hazrat Babajan High School was, you might say, the formal institution giving a regular education that would answer to the public demands and public scrutiny, Whereas the Meher Ashram was a more select bunch. They were up on the hill, and they would attend classes also, but had other varied activities going on. That's the third. And the fourth was the Prem Ashram that emerged out of the Meher Ashram. Those boys who were in such a state that they really couldn't go to classes anymore. And Baba worked with them separately. So you can see that's one of the things that I think that I tried to bring out in this history. Over this 4-year period, Baba started with the most basic rudimentary education, early grades, for a very downtrodden community. Not all of them were downtrodden, but a lot were. Erangel was a really poor village. And then there was the Hazrat Babajan High School, more of a regular educational institution. The Meher Ashram that had regular education but had a very clear emphasis on spirituality. And then the Prem Ashram, which was this amazing group of kids experiencing the realms of spirituality. So it really seems you can see a very clear pattern over this 4-year period. But, at the time, nobody could have foreseen it except Baba. And it would have been hard to sort of see this pattern if you were a Mandali in the middle of it. But in retrospect, it's really clear to me. And then when the school closed, a few of these Prem Ashram boys, Baba worked with in different ways. Like he took 3 of them up to Kashmir, Harvan, where Baba said Christ's tomb is. Baba was in seclusion up on a hillside, and several, Ali Chota Baba was Abdullah Pakran, and someone named Ali Akbar, not Alaba, someone else by that name, were with him there. And then he took them to Persia also. So it seems like he used some of these Prem Ashram boys for special work. I always, when he was up in seclusion in the hut, there were tigers prowling around. And this gives an idea of what it's entailed if ever you want to become one of Baba's Mandali. So man, I wish I were, but I'm just not up to the grade. So Chanji was keeping watch outside, and the tigers were there, and you hear them roaring. And Chanji was afraid of tigers. I can't imagine why. Have you ever been close to a tiger? They're really frightening. Wasaheb wasn't. When his turn was, he wasn't scared in the least. But Chanji was. And Baba would say, you don't have to worry about it. If the tiger eats you, it'll be good for you.
Very big.
I mean, these Mandalay just had to take the punches, I'll tell you. So that kind of work was going on at the end, and then he took them to these same three to Persia, and they all stayed behind. So there's a real, to my mind, a very clear organization of what Baba was doing, from both basic and working with material conditions and working with the most downtrodden and poorly educated to higher and higher levels until you get this completely transcendent group of rare souls. Yeah.
Baba,
Yeah.
he was in just the Prema ashram
No, he was in the Mayor ashram. He was never a premature boy.
there, and then how did that transition into him becoming a monk?
Well, he got brought home by his parents. He was one of those who got brought home. And then a bunch of years, maybe 8 years later, all of a sudden, he got a tremendous reawakening of his love for Baba. Remember, these are just kids. You know what happens when you're 15 and you go on and do the next thing, and within 2 years, you've forgotten what you were doing before. So that happened with most of them. But with Alaba, suddenly he had to see Baba again, and he renewed his connection. So he was one of the few, actually. You know, it's actually in Bob Mossman is here now. I mean, he's in Little Beach now, and he just on today, and he and Farshid Namarinian wrote this book, The Boys.
Yeah.
So from there, I read, I hope I get this right, that when Baba went back to Persia in 1929, taking these three, Abdullah Pakrawan, Ali, and Ali Akbar, with him, when Abdullah Pakrawan was the one who had had the six-plane experience. It's very moving, some of these things, episodes with him. But he got back to near the locality where he grew up. He was an orphan. Both of his parents had died, but he wanted to stay. And Baba said, no, not now. When the time is right, I'll send you back. But he insisted. So Baba said, let him go. And Baba, there were tears in Baba's eyes when he left. And he never saw Baba again in his life, actually. And Baba gave him 3 orders. He was in the state of six-plane experience, but also being conscious of creation. There are all these long messages. There wasn't enough space to reproduce them here, but Baba describing the state that he was in. But Baba told him, don't speak, don't touch money, and don't touch women. Those 3. But he had to make a living, so I think he started some kind of business. And in the course of doing it, he had to start speaking, And the money was being mismanaged. So he began to manage the money himself and touch money. And then I think he hired a lady to clean his house because he was just working all the time and needed some help. And he wound up marrying her. And he said that inner vision he had closed down until it was completely gone. And he had no more of that inner vision of God at all. So I'm sure that, there's probably no words to describe what his experience was there. I have no doubt that in his next lifetime he would come back. Here's something else that book says about him, that in his previous life, Bob said, this is Abdullah Pakrawan, he had been in the 3rd plane in what's called a hayrat. There's a state of enchantment on the third plane. I don't know, have any of you ever been on that?
It's great.
I took a cruise there once.
The cruise. Well, cruises are hard to do because when you get into that hayrat, you freeze. That's what happened to Muhammad the Must. He was getting up and you'll stay in that position for the rest of your life sometimes.
Could you show us that position again?
Muhammad's position. So whatever it is, you just freeze there. And you're in this sort of stunned state. You're very conscious, but you're not conscious of anything that's describable. Anyway, he had been in that state, in that hayrat. That's the worst enchantment on the whole spiritual path is right exactly there. It's not a danger of misusing occult powers. It's nothing like that. It's just an enchantment. And he was in such a state of agitation, apparently, that he had a heart attack and died in his previous lifetime. So that's where he came from. And I think Asfendiyar said that he later got into that state also, but remembered what Baba had said about Abdullah Pakirwan, and it helped him to get through that.
He got in the enchantment state.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, actually, Asfendiyar was the very first of all of them to start having experiences. He preceded all of them. But there are others who are much more. But you know, I haven't even mentioned that another thing in this book, too, after these 34 lectures, is there's a section of 6 discourses to the Mandalay. We found these manuscripts separately. And they're from this exact period. So that can also be found here. There's one part where Baba's talking about the education of children, actually. Very interesting. Clearly relevant to what was starting to happen. Even in November of 1927, Chanji starts writing about a love craze starting to happen among these boys. But here he says, when you're educating children, and they, let their enthusiasm for God run free. Don't check it. Even if it seems that they're going mad, let it happen. Let it go. And I think the implication is, in the course of time, things will normalize. It's like this won't go on forever. But this is the time where they should have that experience. And this also has some interesting things about St. Francis you may not have heard. Here's a thing in one of these discourses that I've never read before either. Baba says that when this is kind of good news when you're about good and bad sanskaras. After death, if you have a mix of good and bad, you experience your bad first in the hell state, and then it's fairly quick, and then the heaven state follows, and it lasts for a long time. So I'd rather do the bad stuff first, and then have a good time.
Give me the bad news first.
Yeah, the bad news first, and then the good news. But he also said this, that the spiritual sanskaras, not good or bad, but spiritual, he said, they're with you permanently. You don't spend them. They don't get spent. They're permanent assets, and they just accumulate on and on until you find God. It's nice to hear, isn't it?
Warren, I think I remember reading that if you have to go to the hell state first, not only is it fast, but you only get to spend 10% of what you're actually owed. So it goes right fast.
That's good one.
And so that's what I remember reading.
There's going to also, I haven't mentioned that in these talks to the boys, so these are some of these discourses to the Mandali. So I've always shortchanged them in every talk because the talks to the boys are so, singular and unique. But these are really interesting and good discourses. So I don't want to give the impression that they're not. But in the talks to the boys, Baba has a whole big long section about the spiritual path. And it's not like anything you'll find in God Speaks. It's completely new information that way. And the big distinction Baba brings up is between the planes and the asmans, or skies. And that's each plane has associated with it an asman, which is like a kind of an adjunct. And it's like if you're traveling through the plains and you get diverted from the plane, you get into this adjunct, which is sort of, the comparison he gives is if you're traveling from Ahmednagar to Bombay by train, the plane would be like the train station, and the asman would be like the village or the city if you leave the station. And these asmans are very enchanting and beguiling. So if you get into them, you're almost sure to get caught there. And you're forgetting about what the purpose of your journey is. I'm sure this Hayrat would be an example of one of them. And Baba gives some detail about the first plane. The Asman has 3 subdivisions. In the first one, you hear this sound, this nod, he says, by virtue of which you can read people's thoughts who are around you. And he says it's very intoxicating to do that. I can't why.
I guess it depends with your friends.
I think maybe now, with all this IT stuff, they could start to create shields. People reading your thoughts.
Well, we need them.
That's right.
All the AI.
Well, they'll have different grades. This could prevent first planers from reading your thoughts. For a third plane, you have to spend 5 times as much. But in the second one, the second subdivision, this is the first Asman now. You can see these light globes, and there's a lot about light globes here.
What did you just say? The word?
First plane, 3 subdivisions.
The first Asman, the second subdivision of it.
Light globes.
Light globes, yeah. And there's a lot in this book about light globes.
Oh.
The center, of course, tomorrow, the next 3 days, there'll be a long program on these things. We'll go into this in detail.
I saw light globes over the lake one night.
Light globes over the lake.
Yeah.
Well,
Really?
maybe it wasn't a light globe, maybe it was a flying saucer.
It was stationary, it didn't.
But then, like on the second Asman, there are 2 subdivisions, heaven and hell. And that's where ordinary gross conscious people after death go to experience their heaven and hell states. But advanced pilgrims there will experience it in their body, for example. And in the third Asman, there are 3 subdivisions. He gives Persian names for them. He says a bit of what's in all of them. So there's a lot of stuff there you never have seen before.
It's so interesting. It certainly gives an image almost of a labyrinth, where you can take a wrong turn and you're
Right.
suddenly you can't find your way out, and then
Yeah.
you're distracted. Interesting.
Baba, after giving this explanation, didn't seem to have done so again. So when Baba was talking, doing his must work and giving Donkin basic information for the wayfarers, he didn't bring this up. But it really sounds to me like that's where the musts were, in these Asmans. They got off the planes and got caught in the Asmans. I would bet anything that that's the case. So Baba gives all these Persian names for them and Indic names and a lot of interesting information about these Asmans. The very last part of these talks to the boys is what I find to be the strangest of all, most esoteric, and that's saying something, because there's a lot of strange and esoteric stuff here. But it's Baba's describing the landscape of the inner planes and asmans, first to seventh, in terms of the flow of pran down from the seventh plane down to the gross sphere. Now, did you know that that happened? That pran flows down from the top, but apparently it does.
I just assumed it did.
Huh?
I just assumed it did.
Well, God
I-
descends, the avatar descends
Right,
down.
The avatar does, but why would pran?
Well, because of energy, which is
Because-
movement, which is life. I mean, you've got space. I mean, that's how I.
It doesn't go down? Did you?
Well, to
I never thought
Gross
about
and
where
light.
it flows from, but it.
Anyway, it
Anyway.
does.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
It makes me think a little bit of the Jewish tradition or the Kabbalah, where they have, you know, that structure,
The Cephod.
the Sephirah, right?
Sephirah,
And
yeah.
then God kind of descends through and shatters through.
Yeah.
Very, makes me think of that
Uh-huh.
a little bit.
Well, as above, so below.
Well, anyway, it does flow down, and so Baba describes what happens in each of the asmans, like in the. Actually, it starts with the seventh, which would be the God realization state, but in the sixth, it's like an immense, undivided pool of light. And in the fifth asman, vibration starts. And in the fourth asman, pran breaks into 7 subdivisions, which is the source of the sevenness that appears in many other arenas. And in the third, it goes over a waterfall,
Oh.
tumbling down. And so all this it's almost like looking at it from the inner land. It's not looking at the inner planes from the standpoint of a pilgrim who wants to ascend it. That's what you'll find in God Speaks and other places. It has that point of view. This doesn't have that point of view. It's like looking at it with God's own eyes, or it would be more relevant to angels than it would to people, the description he gives. So it's very, very strange the way it ends, actually.
Or is there anything about angels in there?
There's a little bit, yeah.
Because I was reading from Nothing to the Everything, and they're like on a certain plane or something. The third.
Yeah, the third asman seems to be where most of them are. The first and second subdivisions, it looks like. Yeah, so like one of them is Alame Huri, the world of the Huris. You know Huris, some of you in Islamic tradition, angelic spirits. So apparently there are a lot of them there. And devas and devis, Hindu gods and goddesses.
And didn't he say in that book that they also want to become human so that they can realize God? Because you can't do it as an angel.
Yeah, he did say in this series of talks, at the moment of Mahapralaya, they have an opportunity. I'm not sure, you see, the original text here is very obscure. So I'm not sure that I read it right. It's hard to make sense of.
It's very what?
I'm not sure that I read it right.
Did you say obscure?
It's very
Oh,
obscure,
okay.
yeah. But it may mean that they have an opportunity to get an atma, that is a soul, and then can get God realized.
But only at the moment of Mahapralaya.
So that would imply that angels don't have souls,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
if that's in fact true.
Yes.
Well, even in the Bible, it says that, God made the angels lower than man.
Yeah, because they can't, because in Baba's account, they can't realize God. They can't find God. Yeah, so there is a little bit about them. Yeah. He also said that for certain people who practice, there's a term in India, tap jap. Tap is austerities, and jap is repeating the name of God. So this is a designation for sort of the things ascetics do in a forest, hanging upside down and doing mantras. He said that there is certain ones among them, after death, can go up to the third asman, and they stay there for a cycle of 4 yugas, which is a huge length of time. In Indian account, it's 4 million years, but I'm not sure if I really believe that. But it's a long time. But then at the end of it, they have to come back to human form and go on with their journey. So it's all kinds of really strange stuff. You know, Baba told this to these boys because it looks like they had the destiny to experience these things. The Mandali didn't.
Right.
Baba never told it to the Mandali.
Well, I thought about that a little bit, and I mean, just in a very basic way, that, you know, a child's mind is so different from an adult mind in terms of like the filters and the
Right.
resistances and,
Right.
wait a minute, I know this, so I can't accept, and so it makes some sense that he was able to share this high-level stuff with these
Right.
young people because their brains were
Right, they're wide open.
so hindered by.
Yeah. Baba would talk about these things, and I'm sure that they would be right there.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas adults would be,
Wait a minute.
wait a minute, didn't you say something different yesterday?
Wait a minute.
Or that's not what my parents told me.
That's right.
Yeah. These kids were just big things.
Who is that man who was the cook? That Baba-
Chuggin?
Chuggin. So Chuggin said to Gil Alvarado just before he passed that regards the boys, that Baba didn't have a filter with them.
Yeah. There was nothing like that. And by the way, it was right after saying that, literally, that Chuggin died within a few minutes. And he actually died right in Gil's arms, right then and there. So it was one of the last things he ever said, actually. Well, how are we doing? What is it?
10 of 6.
Well, you have amazing strength. Keep talking and talking.
More than two.
Well, it's easy for me because I've been working with this stuff. Actually, this is the thing. I've been living in this little private world for 25 years. And now all of a sudden other people are there. It's a real different experience. It's an amazing place to go. So I really do encourage you to
Well, we're looking
go there.
forward to.
So that, yeah.
Well, I just wanted, no, I don't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
But so there's going to be a 3-day program at the center, right? Morning and afternoon, tomorrow, Saturday and Sunday. And tomorrow I'll be giving a history of some of what we talked about here. And the next 4 sessions will be on these 34 lectures. A lot on the creation cosmology. There's really interesting stuff on evolution. The stuff on astronomy is wild. And then the sessions on Baba's account of the involutionary journey. And the last one will be on these talks to the Mandali. But I also, yeah, so that will be by Sunday. And then next Tuesday, I'll say at the Circle of Friends, will be more on these 3 books as the plus Inga's hand, more detailed than today on as the early Mirabad dispensation. And on Thursday, it's going to be on Baba's words, as I mentioned, but didn't really say much about this. These are all critical editions. And this is part of an attempt. This is the Avatar Mirababa Trust's policy that these need to be published in the form of critical editions.
And what does that mean?
And so that will really be the topic next
That
Thursday.
means indexes, supplementary materials, glossaries, supplements.
Yeah, all of that.
Endnotes, footnotes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And it has to be 4 pounds.
That's right.
Or else it's not a good word.
Right, less than that, and you don't get your money's worth.
Right.
But I mean, it has to be based on an exhaustive study of sources. Has to be edited according to the standards what Baba seems to have wanted, and there has to be total transparency about all of this.
Yeah.
So we're talking about that, and I have found that Baba lovers, most Baba lovers aren't going to want to read the endnotes. but they do care about that the work is done well, and that what they're getting, they can trust. And it's a very legitimate concern for the Baba world, and it's very fair to ask the question, you say these are Baba's words, why should I believe that? That's a very good question to ask. So that will be the topic a week from today.
Well, thank you, Ward, for just putting out so much, and it's so great, really.
Yeah.